Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Growing Together, Collaboration Along the Supply Chain. I'm Brian Choi, Managing Partner and CEO of the Food Institute. We at the Food Institute have been serving the industry for over 90 years with news, market data, and trends in the food service, manufacturing, and retail sectors. This year, there are some exciting developments that I'd like to quickly highlight. We recently launched the Food Institute podcast series, a series featuring interviews with top industry executives. Also, a weekender newsletter providing a review and preview of key events impacting the food industry. Third, we have a new website that will be launched later this year in August. And lastly, our updated Food Institute report for our professional and e-members, which is geared more towards industry research on major food trends. So please consider becoming a member by going to foodinstitute.com/joinfi. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or advertiser with us, please contact me at brian.choi@foodinstitute.com.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian and Chris and the Food Institute for putting this on. And we're real, as you mentioned, real excited about today's panel. And also want to thank Pat Mulhern and DMA for also playing a part in this. Being part of Bene Keith, we're proud members of DMA and the solutions that we provide to multi-unit accounts, and want to appreciate their involvement. This is a second in a series of panels that we're having. But finally, just want to thank the panelists. As Brian mentioned and Chris mentioned, we've got an all-star lineup here. I mean, literally, we have the leaders at the top of every part of our supply chain, and it's a thrill to be a part of it with them. But going into this and talking to the panelists and looking at my notes, there's kind of a theme that's kind of come from this. We hear it a lot in our industry, in our country right now. The theme of we're all in this together, and food service is no different. And having each of these leaders on the call is evident of that. And you'll certainly hear this theme throughout this presentation. So again, thank you all for being there. So with that being said, we'll jump right into it. Jonathan's got some prepared remarks. As Chris mentioned, Jonathan is a longtime industry veteran and editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business Magazine. So we'll kick it off with you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Mike. Overall, industry sales have improved pretty steadily since the depths of late March and early April. We began seeing improvements in mid-April, and they have continued as states reopen their dining rooms and consumers return to restaurants. This graphic shows overall improvement in the industry according to crunch time data. But that improvement is not even. Quick service chains have seen the strongest overall sales and have largely recovered during the pandemic. By contrast, full service remains about 50% of its year-ago sales. The sales difference is easy to understand. Casual dining restaurants are fundamentally about dine-in service. They are not built with takeout in mind. Many have taken steps to improve their takeout games, and we've seen generally strong performance by those concepts like Olive Garden and Chili's. But in general, they depend most on dine-in sales, and with restaurants at limited capacities and consumers not always ready to eat inside of a restaurant, that has kept their sales down. Fast food chains, by contrast, are clearly geared towards takeout. That's what they are built to do. Drive-throughs and delivery have proven to be a boon, and so quick service and pizza delivery chains have really thrived over the pandemic. It's to the point now that QSRs are actually adjusting their menus to simplify their operations and target those drive-through customers. We've seen that with McDonald's pondering the end or a significant reduction in all-day breakfast, and Taco Bell cutting 12 items from its menu. That said, the biggest concern that we have is with the independent restaurant. This is where we're going to see the most problems and the most significant. This is, this graphic shows open table data that shows that it is recovering, but recovering more slowly. The best estimate that I've seen is that 1 out of every 5 independent restaurants could not make it through the pandemic. And right now we're already seeing that many chain restaurants are already starting to look to take advantage of this. Chipotle Mexican Grill, for instance, is already calling existing restaurant operators and offering to buy out their leases. That's a very unusual situation that we see a chain restaurant do, but it's a particularly aggressive tactic. A lot of executives are looking at potential opportunities in real estate development. Probably the biggest opportunities is any casual dining restaurant chain that can develop in this particular environment. On the opposite end, anybody that wants to develop a drive-through site is going to have a challenge getting a drive-through site cheap, because those things are going to be at a premium. But you couple of these situations and you could see a scenario in which we see a dramatic shift, an even more dramatic shift from independents to chains, as chain restaurants step into the void left by independents that are closing. That's sort of the environment that we're seeing at the moment. And all of this is sort of thinking that as we see recovery, a lot of things has me particularly concerned that this recovery is going to slow down. First, the virus continues to spread. The virus is what is going to dictate the overall economic recovery. A lot of people are not going to want to eat inside restaurants until they feel safe. And the longer they hear about the spreading virus, the more that remains a major headwind. Then there is the economy. At the end of this week, the extra unemployment benefits run out. Absent a renewal on the part of Congress, millions of Americans are going to lose $600 a week. That is not insignificant. That's about $30,000 a year. So suddenly millions of people making $30,000 a year are going to lose that extra income. That will almost certainly lead to a pullback in restaurant sales, and is going to slow down the economic recovery significantly. That said, I mean, it's hard to imagine that Congress doesn't do anything, given how significant a role that has played. That all said, I mean, as we have seen, the industry remains very popular. People really do want to eat out at restaurants. That's what we've seen during the pandemic. They really want to go out. They don't want to stay cooped up in their homes. They view the drive-through or restaurant takeout as sort of a break from the monotony. And of course, the restaurant industry plays a significant role in feeding the population. The United States is, before the pandemic, half of our half of our food came from restaurants. When we take that away, the other half, grocery stores and other retailers have really struggled to supply the American consumer with food. So the Americans actually need restaurants to a certain extent. And then of course people just love to go out to eat. So they got their stimulus money, and one of the only things that they could do was to go out to a restaurant. And so once the economy picks up again, once the virus leaves, I mean, you see people will go back to restaurants once they feel safe. Once things gets opened. And I think the last point that I want to make here is this. So, going forward, it's really going to be clear that this industry and its vendors, landlords, banks are going to need to work together to stay afloat. When we go back to March, we really anticipated that a lot of restaurant chains were going to end up in bankruptcy. Now, plenty of them did, but not nearly as many as that we thought. And the reason is because they got breaks from their landlords, they got breaks from their vendors, and they got breaks from their banks. The fact that all these groups worked together really worked in the industry's favor, and is going to work, in the industry's favor going forward. That is how this industry is going to survive. And the more that everybody works together and bands together on this stuff, the more restaurants will survive the pandemic. So that is my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. You've mentioned before that dining as we know it won't look like it did until at least 2022, I believe. Can you touch more on that and more perspective on that?
Well, I think, this pandemic is significant, and historically, when you look at events like this, it really does play a role in how people think going forward. It's impossible for me to imagine that people think the same about restaurants or anything else once this is done. Then of course there's so the virus has to play, it has to work its way through the system. We have to get to a point where we have a vaccine. People have to stop seeing all of these numbers all the time. They have to stop getting sick friends. Once they feel safe about going to a restaurant, they'll definitely return. But I think it could take a while. And to me, and then, they'll still use restaurants. They're just not going to eat inside restaurants nearly as much. They're going to order a lot more takeout. They're going to go through a lot more drive-throughs. They're going to order a lot more delivery. They're going to get more pizzas and that sort of thing. And so to me, it's difficult to imagine it really ramping up really quickly in terms of people going back to normal. So I wouldn't imagine any sort of normalcy until 2022, frankly, at the earliest. It could take a while.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you, Jonathan, for your comments and your presentation. And please chime in throughout the webinar. So thank you. As we all have heard before, it's often said in our industry, as the restaurants go, so does the industry. And next, we'll turn to Tom to get a perspective on the restaurant operator. And Tom, thanks for being here. We know you got a lot going on, and certainly appreciate with your background and perspective on what's going on. With almost 1 million food service locations in our country and almost an employee base of almost 16 million, the restaurant industry is the second largest private sector employer in our country. Can you expand on a little bit of Jonathan's comments as well as your perspective on what's going on right now?
Sure, Mike, and great to be here with all of you. Thank you. Yeah, Jonathan, I think, highlighted some really important facts about the industry. What I might do is embellish a few of those. If you think about what's happened since the pandemic started, the industry has lost about $145 billion in sales during the first 4 months. And you think about that, we're estimating that could be $240 billion by the end of the year. So a pretty dramatic impact on the industry. The other thing is we do some of our survey work. 75% of operators say it's unlikely that their restaurants are going to be profitable within the next 6 months. So you think about the kind of immediate impact it had, because we were one of the first industries to close, and the ongoing impact it's having. It's been significant for not only the operators, but obviously for employees. As Jonathan also mentioned, quite a few employees were impacted. At the height of the virus, there were about 8 million restaurant employees. So almost half of the industry was either furloughed or laid off. And given the fact that the restaurant industry has nearly 3 times more jobs than any other industry, that we've lost more than 3 times more jobs, that's a significant impact overall for the industry. So a lot going on, a lot of impact across the business. And as Jonathan also said, it differs greatly by kind of outlet type. QSR obviously doing a lot better than casual dine. And since so many of the independent folks are in that casual dine segment, it's something that we need to all be paying attention to. Those are obviously, a lot of those restaurants are the heart and soul of the communities they operate in.
Absolutely. I mean, restaurants are so important to our culture in our country, and now that the PPP money has been spent in a lot of ways, and operators are in a lot of ways essentially back in the situation where it was a few months ago. Y'all have been, NRA has been very active on Capitol Hill. Can you talk a little bit about the recently announced blueprint for restaurant revival?
Sure. And thanks for asking. I mean, I think this is an example of something that we've all been pushing for, and it's a great example of where all the parts of the industry have come together. But the blueprint basically reinforces the need for a very specific restaurant recovery fund to provide some structured relief to food service establishments. There's also an ask for a second installment of the PPP. As we all know, that was very helpful during this first wave of the pandemic. And especially once we had some of the changes that were enacted as part of the Flexibility Act, it really started to be something that made sense for a lot of restaurant operators. In addition, we want to make sure that any expenses paid with a forgiven PPP loan are tax deductible. And there's also some additional requests in there for more funding and improved terms for things like economic injury disaster loans. So really trying to be more comprehensive in the ask, but the two big things are clearly some specific support for the industry. We've asked for about $120 billion, and secondarily, the extension of the Paycheck Protection Program.
Great. In the spirit of collaboration, as we talked about at the beginning, how can a lot of distributors and manufacturers on this call, how can we help support this?
Well, let me start by saying I think that the industry has come together in a big way. And just one example, maybe I'll talk about for a second how I talk about one industry, because I think it's important as we all think about addressing the needs. When we talk about one industry, at least from the National Restaurant Association perspective, there are really three pieces of that. First, it's on the operator side. It includes the chains, it includes the franchisees, and clearly includes the independent operators. So that's when we think about one from the operator side. From the other side, though, we also think about it as suppliers, distributors, and clearly the operators. They've all got to work together. And I think we've seen some great collaboration. And I'll talk about a program here in just a second that we're getting ready to launch where the industry has come together. And then the last for us is that we have the national organization, but we also have the states. And we need them working together because, as we all know, every state has their own challenges. Different governors are taking different actions at different times. Even local municipalities are taking action. So we've got to be flexible and fluid in how we think about working across that entire system. As it relates to a specific program, we have a program that's called the Restaurant Revival Campaign that was initially slated to kick off kind of late July, early August. We're probably going to hold for a bit here with some of the closures and reclosures that have happened. Probably we want to be thoughtful and make sure we're not getting out there when it's, people aren't feeling great at this time. But the idea is that operators came together with suppliers and with distributors to put a campaign out there to encourage consumers to come back to the restaurants. And we share a lot of those cues around being safe and feeling comfortable because the restaurants are doing all the right things to create that environment. As we all know, this is an industry that's been regulated for years. And so we've already got great practices in place. Now it's a matter of just helping people see the additional work we're doing around sanitation, masks, and social distancing. And so it's a great example of where the industry has come together. And I want to thank Mark and the IFDA team, as well as Larry and IFMA for helping bring those various suppliers, distributors, and operators together to kick off that campaign.
Great. You're exactly right. Restaurants have been practicing food safety well before the pandemic, and it's important to get that message out that they certainly are leaders in that. So thank you, Tom. Now we'll discuss the impact it's had on the distribution community with Mark Allen. And before we turn it over to Mark, I was asked to give my perspective from Bene Keith. And at Bene Keith, we have certainly felt the impact, just like everyone has, with the pandemic. And when this occurred, a number of things that we went into action to stabilize, if you will, whether it relates to inventory, the safety of our employees, a number of things around costs. And we learned a lot too, how to communicate and that sort of thing. But as we mentioned before, our industry goes or the food service distribution goes as the restaurant business goes. So it's very important for us, just like what Tom talked about, a number of things that we did working with our restaurant operators in our markets to help them in any way we can, and provide solutions, new items that they could sell, things that we're hearing from IFDA and the like. And also, besides that, in spirit of partnership, being empathetic on what's going on. Certainly we've been hit, but so, as it's been well documented, that restaurants have been hit. So that was important too. And also, the spirit of collaboration, listening and communicating, not just with our customers, but with our manufacturing community as well. We're talking to them a lot and hearing from them how they're doing and vice versa. And I think that's real important. And I'll also just end by saying, Bene Keith, we're very proud to be part of this industry, and knowing a lot of you on this call, I know y'all are as well. And, something about this industry where you never leave, it's just kind of in your blood. And I think regardless of what area we're in, manufacturing, distribution, or restaurants, there's a common bond and characteristics I think that we all share, and like resilience and grit and passion, innovation and creativity. And I think those kind of things will be key for our industry, not only managing through it now, but during the recovery and beyond. And that is something that I'm very hopeful for, and I know y'all are too. So with that said, Mark, I've given my perspective. Will you share what you're seeing with members in the distribution community?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mike. And thanks for inviting me to participate in this. And Jonathan and Tom did a great job laying out what what happened with the operator. And certainly as you go back upstream, I mean, the distributor was impacted every bit. Distribution was off anywhere between 60 and 90%, depending on your customer mix and even the area in the country in which you serve. So not insignificant. It has come back some degree, although we're seeing some struggles in certain markets where the virus has started to flare up again. We looked into the kind of the size of the impact on distribution. We went into this year as a $300 billion distribution industry. We think we will come out of this year as a slightly smaller, closer to maybe a $200 billion distribution industry. And that really mirrors, I think, some of the statistics and analysis that Tom and his team have done at the Restaurant Association. And I agree with Jonathan that it's going to take a little bit longer to climb out of this. People have to feel comfortable going out into a restaurant and eating. And glad to kind of partner with Tom and his team on their program. We think that's a great idea. But I think for me, and you started to touch on this, Mike, I think the real rewarding thing to see out of this industry was just the resilience and the entrepreneurial spirit kind of kick into high gear. And I would say when the stay-at-home orders were issued in middle of March and states started to shut down, there was kind of a sense of bewilderment. But that didn't last long. I mean, people got to work, and entrepreneurs and business people did what they did best, and they started to look for solutions and look for different ways of doing business. And we saw some pretty interesting things that I thought I'd never see in this industry before transpire. Distributors, for example, going direct to consumer. So offering consumers direct to their doorstep, restaurant quality products in a box, opening up their cash and carries to the consuming public. We saw an intense focus on the independent operator and helping operators in general. Whether that was helping them think through a menu and stand up an online presence if they weren't currently doing takeout, setting up kind of this corner market concept. We heard a lot about that. Distributors helping provide items for restaurants. So as that consumer went in to take out the meal, there was other items there that, that would save them a trip maybe to the grocery store. So that was kind of a big deal. Perishable product, an incredible amount of donating happening of perishable product and fresh product that couldn't be moved throughout the food service channel. And I think the one thing we learned early on was that we could move a little bit into retail grocery. It wasn't easy, but we set up a program with FMI, the Food Industry Association, that represents the grocery stores, and we matched distributors with grocery wholesalers and grocery stores. And where product could move over, it was. I think what we found is that's a lot more difficult. There are two distinct supply chains in this country for a reason, two very different customer bases with different needs. And if you don't have a barcode and a consumer package and a nutritional label on a product, it's hard to move it through grocery. But meats and cheeses and dairy and other things where you can put a temporary label on it were moved over. But I think the big aha was we had additional warehouse space, we had additional transportation capacity, we were happy to kind of allocate that toward retail grocery. And the biggest thing was we had people, somebody that skilled people that could drive an 80,000-pound truck or operate a forklift or use specialized software to select an order. So the industry kind of loaned thousands and thousands of people into retail grocery to make sure as that supply chain was thriving, they had the people necessary, and we could do what we needed to do to take care of our people. But I would just close by saying, Mike, I think there's just a great sense of optimism coming out of this, and folks have not, I would say have used it as an opportunity to really think about the business critically, do what they needed to get the cost side of the equation under control, but people are talking about coming out of this leaner, stronger, more focused, and thinking a little bit differently about how they service the operator customer. So I think that's there is a silver lining in this, and I would point to that as potentially that silver lining.
Great, I would certainly agree with you, Mark. It has always been very active on Capitol Hill, just like NRA, and lately. During this pandemic, obviously, your team has been very active. Can you touch on some latest things that y'all are working on?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And Tom, did a great job talking about what the Restaurant Association was focused on. And we do draft in behind them on their priorities. So if Tom calls and asks, or somebody on his GR team calls and asks, we absolutely support them. We feel a strong operator is the absolute best thing for this industry. But in addition to the PPP loans that Tom mentioned, we have worked on a very narrow fix. Today, you can receive that money as a distributor, and you can use it on rent and lease payments, but you cannot use it and have it forgiven if you pay for inventory. So we have worked to try to get inventory as a forgivable expense. And then we worked on, there are 3 different pieces of potential legislation working their way through Congress right now that we've taken a good hard look at. And one is the Restart Act, Senators Young and Bennett providing loans, a second set of loans to organizations that have been unduly harmed by the pandemic. So you would have to demonstrate some level of harm. We think that's a great idea. The Restaurants Act, Senator Wicker, which I know Tom is and the Restaurant Association have been very, very supportive of kind of a grant program to the restaurant industry, because we have been, as Tom mentioned, as harmed as anybody else in all of this. And then I would say the thing that we've been really pleased by over the last several weeks was Senator Rubio chairs a small business committee in the Senate, working with Senator Collins, Shaheen, and Cardin on another round of what kind of a different set of PPP loans this fall. So a way to go out and get loans. Again, inventory would be forgivable, at least in some of that draft language. You would have to show you are harmed to a certain degree, so it would narrow the pool of companies that would be eligible for those. But restaurant and the food service industry would seem to be the sweet spot for something like that. So we've had great conversations. They've come back to us in a couple of questions in different areas. And then I would just close by saying a couple things that are unique to distribution that we're focused on are tax credits for perishable product that was stuck in the supply chain and distributors couldn't donate, couldn't do anything with. You can take a deduction for that today. We're working on a tax credit, and same with accounts receivable. There is a kind of a what I would call a donut hole of bad debt from March sitting on distributors' books. You can deduct that, but we are looking for a tax credit. We want a dollar to dollar offset for that potential bad debt. So, Mike, couple things that we're working on.
Great, Mark. Thank you for that. Larry, we've heard from the restaurant perspective. We've heard from distribution. Now let's turn to manufacturing. Give us some thoughts on what manufacturing you're going through right now.
Will do. Good morning, Mike. And before I begin on that, I'd just like to welcome Tom Bene again, not just to this call, but to his new job. There's nothing more important to us than a strong leader at the National Restaurant Association. So, Tom, we really are excited that you're there. And we look forward to working with you in the future. We got plenty of stuff to work on, as I know you know. The manufacturing community, IFMA's membership, kind of is bifurcated. We have about 25% of our members that are heavy into retail CPG. The other 75%, though, are all food service. So we had some significant differences, Mike, in how the performance of those companies looked. And that's persisted all the way to today, although, of course, the food service only companies now, or the divisions, are approaching maybe 70 to 90%, depending on the segments that they sell. So big impact depending on the business that they were in. And right now is the time that everyone is looking to build their strategies for the next year. So we would expect to see a lot more of the food service only manufacturers start to build a strategy to move over into other segments on the retail side, and certainly in the digital area. And food service is such a big business. In the past, we all sort of just hoped to a degree that different segments would buy some of our lower selling SKUs and some of the other products that we were not mainstream in. I think all of the strategies today are going to be about winnowing out. So we're in a complete reset, Mike, from every aspect of the business, from product channel focus to individual SKUs and how we use innovation. I mean, just think about the broker community, which we rely heavily on. The headcount on the broker side is down anywhere from 30 to 50%. Now, I know folks don't want to really talk about that, but that's the reality. And as we've discussed on this panel, preparing for this, question I have is, who's going to sell your product? And how are you going to sell it? So I'm really very excited about some of the weaknesses that this pandemic has exposed. Let's just talk about a couple of them, okay? Number one, why is it that it takes our costs 3 times per transaction in food service and it doesn't retail? Why don't we have visibility of inventories? I know, Mike, you would have, at Bene Keith, you would have wished you'd known about what were the right inventories within days of this happening. Everything slowed down in this system, and then we had a lot of inventory that was going out of date. Well, what if we had a vision of, or a visualization of demand? You know, so there are some significant weaknesses that we've just tolerated in this industry, and we have to get after those. And that comes through collaboration. I can't do it alone. I need IFDA and the distributor community, and we need the operator community to help us. Now that occurs maybe, you know, with the big chains, and that's why their cost of sales is lower. They're, you know, they've worked on these areas, so we need to work on them. And those are just a few areas, Mike, that I could say how it impacted manufacturers.
Great. Well, covered it very well. You know, suppliers in normal times, you know, lead operators and distributors with innovation of new products, whether it's plant-based items or new items for home, you know, curbside delivery and that sort of thing. What kind of innovation of new items have come out of this, or even thoughts on that?
Well, we've talked about labor forever, and the expense of labor and the difficulty in getting labor. If you look forward to 21, we're probably going to have upwards 30% to 50% less labor in this business. Now, Jerry's going to talk in a minute about diversity, but we're just going to have less people in this business. And so we have to do a lot more with less. So whether you call it speed scratch or fully prepared products, help dramatically in those areas. So innovation is really ramping up in those areas, Mike. Yes, everything PC, yes, everything individually wrapped is huge. The packaging companies, the bag companies are all doing great. However, we're going to go through this little dip here pretty soon. But longer term, we've got to think about, how do we get cost out of our production system? You know, at the restaurant level, it's a 3 times what I paid for at business. That puts us at a huge disadvantage to retail. So I think things like speed scratch and we're seeing, I don't know, anybody that looked at the Wall Street this morning, you may have seen this whole bioprinting of chicken nuggets in Russia that KFC is doing. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but technology is really coming to age in our industry, and we need to look for lots of ways to get cost out.
Great. Thank you, Larry, for your perspective.
You bet.
Now, I'd like to switch gears a little bit from talking about COVID-19 to another topic that is just as important and just as top of mind, and that's diversity and inclusion. And much like our other panelists, we have another industry leader who is an expert in this area as well. And before I turn it over to Jerry, a few stats just to kind of set the stage here. American restaurants are more diverse, as we know, than any other sector of the economy. 47% of industry employees are minorities compared to 36% across the rest of the economy. 40% of restaurant businesses are owned by minorities compared to 29% of businesses across the rest of the economy. 40% of managers and supervisors are minorities, more women and diverse leaders than any other category of business in the country. So Jerry, you're a leader in this industry, you're an executive in this industry, you work with a number of companies and leaders in this industry, you're a former chef, you've a great background. Stats show a lot, but what more can be done in this area?
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you putting up the stats. Everybody knows we have a very diverse industry, and I find the conversation about collaboration. We see restaurant industry collaborating, distribution, manufacturing, both internally and then with the federal government. And the other thing that I hear is innovation. But those things of collaboration and innovation are very rarely applied to the workforce challenge that we have. So I think certainly COVID-19 and the resulting anti-racism protests have caused our industry to have to pivot and deal with things that we haven't had to deal with before. And so I think we have to look at the commonalities and then what are the opportunities. So first off, everyone here on this panel knows that we all are in the people business, serving food and service to some degree. We all have a diverse and changing workforce. You know, our young people especially, but as the data just suggests, large pockets of people of color. We all have to take a serious look at how race and structural issues prevent Blacks, other people of color, and women from moving into the upper echelon of leadership. And so we really have to figure out how we're going to make the changes as an industry, or we're going to pay the price. I can tell you that the young people, those Zoomers out there and those millennials that are marching are not just Black or brown. They're white and they want change. All of us who've employed the younger generation know they're impatient and they expect us to raise our game. And as we've seen, corporate America has to fill the slots or the spots that unfortunately our political leaders haven't been able to fill. You just think of the two sports teams that are, one's already changed its name, and the other one is considering. That would not have happened without corporate involvement. So at this time now, we need to listen to our employees, because your Black and brown employees had a different experience in COVID-19 than maybe their white counterparts. A lot of that has to do with socioeconomics, where they live. We have to support them, and lots of things that the association's doing in terms of the webinars that it's been putting on, and to support employees to say, hey, look, at our industry cares about you, and we need you to come back. But then we have to act and have to really take action that will be around 6 years from now, not just 6 weeks. And so there's a few things I'm going to say that I think is a real opportunity for the industry. We need an industry-wide plan for inclusion, not just distribution plan or the restaurant plan, industry-wide, because we source from the same pool of talent. We have some of the same challenges. We have some of the same image issues because ours is hard work. Secondly, we need a comprehensive, or more appropriately put, there's 4 points to this. We need a comprehensive leadership development initiative that works for people of color. We have lots of people of color. We just can't get them beyond a certain level. In the restaurant side, you can't get them into multi-unit level. You have no problems getting them to be assistant managers, GMs, but Blacks and Latinos, very few in the multi-unit. Secondly, we need a clear path to ownership, and that especially applies to the African American community, as we can see right now. There is to be a clear indication of how people get in this business, how they can advance their business and grow their businesses. Because in communities of color, if they don't own anything, they don't control anything, and that's why people sometimes, tear down their own communities. We have to understand that ownership applies for every cultural group, and the more ownership we have in our industry that is diverse, the better off we are. That also includes diverse suppliers. We have to get serious about how we're going to engage with diverse suppliers to help those businesses grow again. They create an economic engine in those communities of color, which helps everyone. And if a community is healthy and it's thriving, there's less crime, there's less all the other negative outcomes. And the last thing is we have to engage the communities of color to accelerate anti-racism efforts. We have to look at the structural things that are in play that keep us from moving forward. I think if we do that as an industry, I think we'll be in great shape coming out of the COVID-19. We know we'll make it out of this. We're a very resilient industry. I think if we collaborate in the way we see people talking today, we have a really good chance to be in good position, as Jonathan says, probably 2022, when we get back to what will be the next normal.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. You mentioned listening in order to make a change and make progress. Can you go into some detail, a little detail on that?
Yeah, I don't know about you folks, but I've been accused by my wife of 40 years of sometimes not listening. Okay, so we don't hear. So what we really have to do, especially this time, is take an opportunity to really find out what's going on with your employees. I can tell you, I've seen a bunch of stuff out there over these last 6 or 8 weeks, talking to restaurant operators and about what they're doing in their business. I saw this just on Friday. I found out about this anti-racism initiative. You work on something for 21 days and you establish a new habit. And they give you the tools to kind of find out what your neighbors are experiencing, what their life experiences are. So we have to listen to them. What's it like being the only woman on this particular team? What's it like being the only Latino on this team? What are we doing that we have to stop doing? What do we have to change? Now, again, if you ask those questions, you have to be willing to follow up on them. And I think right now, if we don't do this, I've already heard of operators losing some of their best employees. They don't want to come back. They're going into another industry because they think our industry doesn't really have it together as far as it comes from their perspective on developing a career. We really need to think about how our image is going to be crafted as we go forward to see us as an industry of win and of inclusion. And if we listen to our employees and listen to the communities, we'll find out exactly what we need to be doing.
Great. Thank you. Tom, you have a lot of experience and knowledge in this area, leading with Women's Foodservice Forum and other initiatives. Can you give us your perspective on this topic?
Sure. First of all, Jerry, I think you just hit the nail on the head with listening. I think that starts with, and this is true, I think, even of general employees in an organization, but I think it's even more true now. We've got to step back and all take the time to understand what the issues are, what the concerns are, and maybe more importantly, ask those people for how they could help us solve these issues. Because I think that by listening and engaging our employees and associates across the entire industry, we'll not only learn a lot, but I think we'll also get some great new ideas. You mentioned Women's Foodservice Forum as well. So in my past, I had a chance to sit on that board and executive committee. And one of the things we also did was started to really identify where the gaps were. Similarly, what Jerry talked about is if you don't understand where the gaps are, it's really hard to solve them, because these kind of issues are not going to be solved in a general approach. It's going to need to be very specific actions, and it's going to need a lot of people coming together, bringing the best ideas and thinking. And so there's an example. We actually partnered with a couple of organizations to identify the facts. What were the number of women in leadership positions? What were the gaps that existed that maybe prevented women from moving up the organizations? So it's understanding the information, the data, and then taking specific actions that I think will allow us to work together. And then I think it's been said a couple times here by the entire industry working together, whether it's the supplier community, the distributors, or the operators. I think there'll be great solutions that come out of that effort. And I think it will, again, create some of the best ideas for all of us to implement. I can tell you early days, and Jerry's very familiar with this, we've had a lot of independent operators who don't have the resources coming together and saying, how can we address our employees? How can we deal with this with our customers? And so I think that the more we as an industry can come together and talk about it and bring real solutions, many, many more will benefit from that. And I guess the last thing I would just say is that one of the things we're trying to do as an association in partnership with Jerry is look at programs like unconscious bias and unconscious bias training. How do you make sure that's available and accessible to a very large group so that everybody has the ability to go through that kind of a program? And I think when you take the time you go through that as an individual or as a group, it's amazing the kind of insight that you get about those little things that you don't realize that you might do, or each of us might have in our background. And so there are lots of different ways I think we can approach this, but it's going to take a multi-pronged approach, as Jerry said. Great.
Thank you, Tom. With this panel and these two topics, we could go on for a couple more hours. We only have a few minutes left, but want to take one question from the group. And if each of y'all could just provide your perspective, and quite simply, what is the conversation a year from now? Where are we going to be in a year? And that can be on any topic. Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Mike, it's an interesting question, and I think we've already hit on it. I do think as an industry, we have to come together and do a better job collaborating up and down the supply chain. I mean, there are many opportunities, and as we work with Larry's group or Tom's group, when there is money involved and a transaction involved, you get that natural kind of tension in the supply chain. But there is absolutely no reason why that has to exist. I do think we have learned some things going through this. Our supply chain's probably not as flexible as we would all maybe have imagined it was going into this. It's robust, but I do think there are some big, and I'm not talking a big study that kind of covers the waterfront, but let's find one or two things that we can really drill deep on, one or two things that we can really own, and one or two things that impacts all of us and can have a dramatic impact. And then I think Jerry's going to be one of the busiest guys in the industry, because I do think this is the absolute time for the type of conversations that he's been having and the types of initiative that he's been leading. We had Jerry into our board several years ago. We created a women's leadership committee to focus on gender diversity, and we're in the process of kind of moving that into more inclusion for all peoples. But one of the things that we realized early on was, as an association, we were kind of tone deaf to some degree to the conversation and our imagery and how we thought about speakers at events and how we, our marketing materials. And so we had to put ourselves in a mirror and really look at how we were doing things and setting kind of the standard or acting as an example for our segment of the industry. So I think there's all sorts of opportunity in some of the areas that Jerry's leading, and we will, work much closer with Jerry over the future, I think, to make that happen.
Thank you, Mark. Larry, I'll ask it a different way. Bold prediction for 2021 in manufacturing, given where we are right now.
Bold prediction, Mike. Bold prediction. Probably 21 will be the biggest M&A activity year, I think, in food service history, maybe. I think after all that's done, I think the key point for food service is we've got to focus and realize that there's only one consumer, and that consumer is diverse. And if we don't work together to win that consumer, the retail side will. And whether that's workforce development, as Jerry talks about, or eliminating cost of doing business, we better focus heavily on that one consumer and then get rid of the inefficiencies in our business. I think I like 21 to be, if I could make a bold prediction, let's work on that and let's make that real, because I think that's how we're going to succeed in 21, but in the future.
Great point. Tom?
Well, I would certainly say, look, it's been said already, the passion, the entrepreneurial spirit in this industry, it's going to come back, and it's going to come back strong, but it may look a little bit different. And I think going all the way back to what Jonathan said, I mean, there are new trends that are popping up. There are changes that are happening across this industry. And I think it's going to show up in menu design. It's going to show up in the outlet itself and what they look like, and potentially how the space is developed. And I think it's going to certainly look like the face of both the consumer and that operator continuing to evolve and change. And I think that's really exciting and interesting going forward for all of us. I think the one thing that we can count on, though, is that this industry will continue to be flexible and adaptable. And just think about the changes that have happened in the last 4 or 5 months. The amount of takeout and delivery that's been happening, things like cocktails to go, which no one probably would have ever assumed could have been a reality across the industry, or the way menus are delivered now, and contactless approaches or contactless cash out at the end. So there's just so many things that have happened through this time that many, I think, will stick and will create yet the next wave and the next level of this industry going. So we're definitely going to be back. It's just a matter of all of us coming together. I think that's been a great theme here, and just appreciate being part of this. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Tom. Jerry, year from now, it sounds like you're going to be pretty busy. It sounds.
Yeah, I'm pretty busy right now. I might have to clone myself, but a couple things. 1 year from now, I am committed to having an industry-wide inclusion plan done and committed to by all the key constituents of our industry. I think the time is right. We can get it done, but it needs to be written. It needs to be backed by research and real resources. Let's not starve diversity to death like we've been doing for the last 10 years. Secondly, I would say to all of you, as we look around this panel, the only person of color is moi. My mentor, Dr. Samuel Patansi, said, if the next time you're making a major decision, everyone in the room looks like you're doing it wrong. So we've got to find a way to make sure we have diverse perspectives in when we're making important decisions, or the outcomes will miss the mark. So I think this inclusion plan is a real winner. And if we get more people to sign up for the Action for Diversity, the CEO pledge, I know Tom and I are both signatories to it. It's a commitment to diversity and inclusion made by over 1,000 members of the Fortune 500 category, Fortune 1000, excuse me. And I encourage you, if you don't know more about it, go to our website. You'll learn more about it from us there. But I appreciate the work that you're doing here with bringing this panel together, because we need more collaboration to make sure we can solve our long-term problems when it comes to our workforce.
Great. Jerry, thank you very much. Jonathan, you started us off, and why don't you close us off with a bold prediction for next year?
Oh, bold prediction. Well, I mean, I think that the industry is going to look a lot different. I tend to agree with what others have said, that we're going to have a lot of M&A activity. The industry is going to be, it certainly, unfortunately, is going to be smaller. And though I don't expect we really aren't going to see something like a return to normal until 2022, I definitely think that the industry is going to be well on its way to a recovery by this time next year. You will see, you're certainly going to see a lot of development activity. And I think if the boldest prediction that I can give you is that next year you're going to see significant development activity, particularly among large chains, but also some smaller chains that see some opportunity in sort of developing new locations, taking advantage of a real estate market that is far more favorable for them, and then sort of kind of reworking their models, their real estate models to adjust to a consumer that is using them a lot differently. So I think that by this time, certainly next year, the industry is already going to look significantly different than it does right now, and certainly than it did before the recession. And that those differences are going to be throughout the industry, from ownership to the leadership that you see, to how the restaurants look inside. So that's roughly my bold prediction, or maybe it's not so bold.
Great. Thank you. Time for one quick question, because I think this is relevant for all parties. Someone asked, and Mark, I'll ask you this if you don't mind. What are you seeing as best practices regarding testing employees and facilities for COVID?
Yeah, a good question, Mike. And I think the distribution community probably has an easier time of it than other industries. Like we're very close to the meat processors, and you know, they have not had as easy of a time. But distributors have done a pretty good job, I think, with social distancing. I'm not aware, and I talk to distribution companies all the time, aware of any outbreaks of the virus. There are ones and twos. We've done a pretty good job as an industry, I think, putting protocol in place and using OSHA and CDC and NIOSH guidance to help companies understand how they should test, what they should do if they have a positive test, how they should kind of segregate and quarantine that person, how they should map the employees around them. So I would say that the distribution industry has done a pretty good job. And you know, if anybody wants more information, our website is loaded with kind of guidance and kind of a cookbook on how to kind of think about testing and ensuring your workplace is safe.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank everyone again for your involvement. This has been really special with all of y'all on the call. And unfortunately, we only have a very limited time, and but I think we hit on two key topics in our country right now that are important, not only in our country, but in our restaurant industry. And I thank all of you for sharing your thoughts, and thank the Food Institute and DMA for putting this on. So with that, I'll yield back to Brian. So thank you guys, and thanks for everyone who signed up for the call as well.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining us today. A special thanks to all of our panelists again. Please stay safe and have a wonderful day.